So one of the big manoeuvres we've seen really since the referendum was it's now apparently all about trade, which is kind of bizarre, particularly for Brexit. And one of the things that the rhetoric you have seen is it's all about global Britain. Well, we're going to read this article from politics.co.uk because George Magnus has this spot on. So for some time now, some of us have been trying to make the case that the global Britain rhetoric beloved by the government Brexiteers and their supporters is a dangerous fantasy. Cue Donald Trump, who apparently wants to underline that the point of us this week, he has announced that the EU, along with Canada and Mexico, will be subject to new tariffs on steel and aluminium. The message is that erratic and impulsive trade policy now prevails over alliances and the rules-based world trade order that the US created and nurtured. They are the grave warnings here for Brexit Britain. For the UK, as for other EU countries, steel is not economically essential. But for the UK's 31,000 steel workers, and for Port Talbot, for example, there are good reasons to be nervous. The big danger, though, is that steel is the tip of a growing protectionist iceberg. The EU, Canada and Mexico have all said they intend to retaliate by targeting mainly US agricultural products, and the EU has also cited jeans, bourbon and Harley-Davidson motorbikes. There is no telling how far this tit-for-tat might go. Tariffs have been introduced under the rarely used and old trade legislation that invokes national security. There is no way that steel quantifies nowadays, and this is a plain excuse for the Trump administration to play protectionism to its core supporters. Others can now cite national security as an excuse to hit back, and so bypassing established rules and procedures altogether. More worryingly, using the same national security clock, the US has announced last month that it was investigating the application of 25% tariffs against imported automobile parts. Cue proper klaxons this time. Cars are big business for Germany, among others, and also the UK. According to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the UK car industry employs 169,000 people directly and 814,000 including component suppliers and broad support activities. This is a core and highly efficient part of our manufacturing and export base. About 12% of total exports and 15% of car exports go to the US. For Brexit Britain, America's new trade policies are of the utmost significance, not least to Trade Secretary Liam Fox, who said last year that new trade negotiations with the US would begin immediately. Yesterday he confessed he was disappointed with the US steel action. Disappointed, he should be fuming on our behalf. And remember, this whole deal with America, a lot of these Brexiteers were saying how wonderful and how much money we would make off the US. And yet, here we have an exact point in case. This is not going to be good. We've already got from the trade papers that were released a while back from David Davis, basically saying, yeah, it's only going to give us like a 0.8% boost to GDP. You know, what wonderful trade. And now we have America going, well, we're going to implement all this protectionist policy. This is not going to be good because this always has a knock-on effect. So, these are things that we need to note now. First, Trump's actions, unless he withdraws them, will divide Brussels and others towards China. notwithstanding our reservations about that country's protectionism too, but the EU is pretty good at negotiating trade all over the world, and the UK will be at a huge disadvantage by not being part of it. Second, even Brexiteers ministers know what sort of counterplay the US would be in trade talks. America first means exactly what it says. The US has attributes we lack: size, leverage, and experience in adequate adequate staff for tough trade negotiations. For the record, so does the EU. Third, the EU and others will doubtless file complaints about the US with the World Trade Organization's Dispute Settlement Agency. If the WTO rules against them, they would have to carte blanche hit back at the US using the same excuses for protectionism if it ruled in favour of the US. The US might ignore the World Trade Organization or leave, as some White House officials favour, considering they were the key integrations of building this. And again, the rule of law, according to Trump's White House, just basically doesn't matter. This would be the commercial equivalent of the kiss of death for the UK. It is relevant that small and very open economy outside the EU, the UK could not rely on stable and respected World Trade Organization rules for many years. It might take to conclude other trade agreements. The consequences would be catastrophic for the economy and jobs and national finances. Trump's trade salvo over the steel industry is a betrayal of the trust vis-à-vis allies, and Brexit Britain in particular. This is a clear warning that the world trade system is in danger. The idea that on our own we would free trade our way to prosperity on leaving the EU was and remains dangerous twaddle. And that's been the rhetoric during the referendum and even before the referendum about how wonderful we would be being free trade with all these nations, most of which, by the way, we trade now with the EU and in the single market, and being a member of the single market, not just having access. Being an actual member is what's important. Being a member of this bloc is a good idea. It's not dumb fantasy. And here's the thing. Because of how the EU has been built and been structured, you have seen all these rules and regulations come in. Because rules and regulations are important and of what have been so crucial to building such a successful trading bloc. Now, I know I'm going to get accusations thrown at me of, oh, the EU's protectionist. We're part of the EU currently. So being part of the EU means we are protectionist, meaning that they are protecting us and everyone else. Is this a good thing or a bad thing if you think that is the case? Now, the other thing is, if you want to take that argument, if the EU is protectionist, then why then does the EU have some of the lowest tariffs in the entire world? And bear in mind, if you think that Trump's tariffs are about 25% on, aluminium and steel, are excessive and protectionist, bear in mind the average EU tariff is 3%. So your protectionist argument doesn't really stand up. But we need to be part of the EU. We need to be in the single market. We need to be part of the customs union. This isn't a silly game you can just play and make up basically bullshit excuses about sovereignty. You need the strength behind you of all these countries as well, because by ourselves this isn't going to work. We will be a small, insignificant economy compared to the rest of the world. Just look at how much our growth has slowed since the referendum and since we triggered Article 50. That should be massive warning signs to everyone about how important this was. But apparently now that trade is somehow an important factor, and they're all talking, all the Brexiteers are talking about how wonderful free trade agreements are going to be and what they want for free trade agreements. And you're like, guys, the EU's right there. With all these rules, all these free trade agreements, all the advantages we could want, we were part of that. We were part of the decision makings in that decision making process. And I'm sorry, if you think that's not the case, you don't understand how the EU works and how laws get passed. We were regarded as one of the big three. We were one of the most influential people in the European Union. Not anymore. So, you know, there you go. I don't know what else to say. But as usual, Brexiteers and their fantasies are being torn to shreds by reality.